January the 25th. I'm going to start right here because I wanted to look really briefly at this map before we move on to talk about World War. Where's my pointer then? Before we talk about this. And I wanted to look at this map because look over here at this section. Do you remember when you were reading this chapter that there was a part that talked about Russia? You remember it talked about Russia and it said something about the ports of Russia. What did it say? Did you read the part? It had a map and it kept saying, now look at the map, and it was this particular section of Europe.
Oh, right, yes.
Okay. What was the thing that was going on with the ports in Russia?
Oh,
the seaports. Micah.
Well, since they're all the Baltic Sea, they're all very cold.
Yes, and not only the Baltic Sea. Think Russia. Across the top of Russia does anybody know what ocean? The Arctic Ocean. That's a lot. When it says the ports were frozen, it doesn't actually mean the whole ocean is frozen. It means icebergs, cold, like it's just not safe for boats to be traveling a lot here. So it's really important, it's always been important to Russia to have access through to other parts of Europe. Down here, if they can get access to this sea, which is what sea? The Black Sea, then they can get through that access to what? Say it loudly. Mediterranean Sea. And then from there to the world, the Atlantic Ocean. But to get from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, you have to go through this very skinny part of water that was highly contested during World War I. There's a sea right here. Your book was talking about that sea. Your book was talking about how literally hundreds of thousands of people died trying to defend this area and fighting over who was going to have control of it. Now, why am I telling you this? Partly because it was really cool and it's not in your note cards, but partly because when you think about the war, the Ukrainian-Russian war that's happening right now, I want you to remember in historical context, this is not a new controversy. Russia has always wanted to have access to the Black Sea. And 5 years ago when they took, what peninsula is this? Crimean Peninsula. When they took this Crimean Peninsula, in large part, it's because this is really valuable and important land. The way that they have so much port access to the Black Sea gives them a lot of powerful ways to be able to trade with the rest of the world. And in case you think, but we're talking about boats. Boats are so old-fashioned. They're not. There's a lot of stuff that this very day happens on boats. Can anybody think about something that is transported around the world on boats?
Cars.
Cars are, yes. What else, Ben? Okay, give me an example.
Running.
Yes, right. Exactly. Yes, Blythe?
Well, if you move and you like hit on the airplane, you can also get food and satellite.
Yes, exactly. Because nearly everything that you purchase on Amazon that comes from the East, like from China, comes on a boat. If you ever have accidentally bought something directly from China, have you ever done that on accident? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh no, I'm not going to get my thing for 3 months. It's because it's not coming on an airplane. It's so expensive to transport on airplanes. They transport on boats. It's still a main point of trade and communication. So for that, and for lots of other reasons, this is still a really big deal. And it is for this reason that it's not merely that Russia is acting imperialistically right now, though I think they are. There's also really practical, functional reasons that Russia wants to have control over Ukraine, the largest country in Europe, with lots of port access to the Black Sea, which is a really valuable thing. Yes, Madeline?
Why don't they use the sea?
Oh, well, yes, they do. They do and they can. But but that's really, really far away from all these, other nations that they want to be able to trade with. Russia wants to have an east and a west presence. If you think about like the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, they're not the same space. Pacific is enormous, way bigger, in terms of getting across it. So it takes just a really long time to go across that. So yeah, and then they only get to, California and the coast of South America, and they have to go through the Panama Canal, which costs them money. So there's lots of reasons they want to be able to go both ways. That's a good question, though. Okay, I'm moving on from that. I just wanted to make that point. I want you to go to your notes. If you're at home, then you're going to start with the handout. Everybody flip to the back side of the handout. We're not starting with the causes. We're starting with these notes that we had talked about the other day about the two big approaches that nations take to foreign relations, how they respond to other countries. This is also, incidentally, paragraph 3 on your February 20th project asks you to think about these ideas. So both for the sake of the war and for the sake of that project, I want to make sure that you have this written down as notes. So everybody should have the notes I gave you open to the back side that has at the top isolationists or non-interventionists. The first approach that a nation could take. Point 1. The government should be primarily concerned about the needs and desires of its own country. Fill in those blanks. Needs and own. O-W-N. Let's pause. I want you to get your brain around this. A non-interventionist would say, my country's government needs to be thinking about its own needs. They're elected for this purpose, to take care of this country. So that's the point. Point 2. Supports a republic, not an empire. Fill in the blanks, Ben. Republic and empire. It's this. On the back. Look on the back. That's what you're supposed to be filling in. Supports a republic, not an empire. The two blanks are republic, not an empire. Now, you guys all know the Empire Strikes Back, but an empire in general is empire building. We're going to go, we're going to take over things, we're going to be all over the place. Whereas a republic is like managing your own government, building your own government. That's point 2. Point 3. Generally has a policy of non-intervention. Non-intervention. We're not getting involved with other people's issues. Non-intervention. Did you write non there? Dre, write non. Okay. Does it make sense to you why a country or why a government would have a non-interventionist policy when you look at that? Why a government would say, we're not empire builders, we're not messing with things that aren't our country's business, we're just taking an approach where we are going to manage our own affairs and not try to go around and get our hands in everybody else's affairs. Make sense? Okay. Now the other approach. The negative word would be imperialistic. A positive word, internationalist. I want you to track with how this would make sense. Point 1. The government should protect national interests, even in conflicts around the globe. Globe is the blank. You can put whatever you want that gets that idea across. You have to be able to write about this. You've got to be able to potentially answer a discussion question with this. You've got to be able to write about it in your paper. But it's protecting national interests even in conflicts around the globe. So this would be a country saying, our engagement in Afghanistan is because it's in the best interest of our country to fight terrorism, even in other parts of the world. That protects our country. Point 2, believes in, I have United States, U.S. in parentheses because this is a big part of the U.S. policy, but it's also true of other countries. Believes in U.S. leadership in the world. Leadership is the blank. This would be the kind of policy that says, okay, we don't get anything from Somalia, but you know what? It's wrong that innocent people are being killed. Or Rwanda. Innocent people shouldn't be slaughtered by the millions, not while we're here and we have money and we have resources. We shouldn't let this go on. It's our job as leaders of the free world to prevent people from doing horrifying things to other people. It's only what's morally right. This is an interesting thing about this, is that when the Holocaust was happening in World War II, lots of people in U.S. leadership knew it was happening. Millions of people targeted because they were Jews, had everything taken away, were exported and were systematically killed in horrible scientific ways. This happened while Americans knew it was happening and we did nothing for years. Why? It wasn't our business, these weren't our people, they're not our citizens. So you see how the conflict between these two ideas is often part of the argument that people have about policy. And then point 3, spreads our, I put in parentheses, superior, because why would you be spreading your government if you didn't think it was superior? So spreads our superior political and economic systems to other countries by force if necessary. This happens often in American policies. It's working on spreading democracy around the world. We have a better system. We have a superior system. We need to help build in Afghanistan systems that will let them have a healthy system of government too. Does it make sense to you that people could legitimately hold an internationalist perspective like this? Yes? Does it make sense to you that some people might argue against that with a more non-intervention policy? Yes? Enough that you could understand arguments on both sides, that you're able to communicate some from both sides. Okay. That's important for your project. That's also important for your discussion question. Yes?
It makes sense for some countries to be isolationist
Mm-hmm.
and some countries to be internationalists, but just because you're an isolationist doesn't mean you can't be a part of the world.
Correct.
Which just those
Well,
they
yeah.
can still be isolationists by not interfering, but they can still stay connected.
Yes, for sure. Did you have another point with that, Sorry?
Well,
The same one?
when it comes to nationalism, I've heard many times that when generally the U.S. or any other country tries to help and stuff, then it does sometimes help, but a lot of times it just leads to a war that goes on for a very long time.
Or we can at least say it's always complex. It's never simple. But don't let that scare you away from aspiring one day to be a diplomat or something like that, because it's also important. This is really important stuff to have good people involved with. All right, let's flip now to our note cards, which means I want you to flip your paper upside down, flip to the other side, and we're going to do our note cards in conjunction with the notes on the other side. I worked really hard at keeping your homework simple, but there are some other things I want you to know. And that is what's on this side of it. So let's start with the simple thing. The first cause of World War I, Brody? Nationalism. Okay. On this piece of paper, write nationalism where it says cause 1. On your notes, write nationalism, and then I'm going to read the sentence that is above that. The other thing I want you to know, and you're going to fill in a blank. Ready? Nationalism. As the countries of Europe were having boundary lines redrawn, people felt like their identity was being threatened. You should write the word identity in that blank. Yeah.
Didn't we also
it would work. People felt like their identity was being threatened. I'm going to explain this to you, I think, in a way that you can understand. People identify, for instance, they might identify with being from Switzerland. They say, I'm Swiss. But what if somebody comes along, redraws the lines, and says, you're actually Austrian now? Oh, I'm not Austrian, I'm Swiss. Or if you were in Austria-Hungary, they negotiate, they redraw the lines, and they say, you're actually German now. This was very bothersome to people who said, I'm not German, I'm Austrian. You can't just change my identity by redrawing lines. Any more than you would like it if somebody came and redrew the lines in North America and drew down so that Virginia was part of Canada. How would you like it if I said to you, you are not an American anymore. You've now become Canadian because we redrew the lines. Would you like that? No, you wouldn't like that. Yeah, and you wouldn't have to talk with an accent, but you couldn't be American. You wouldn't have the benefits of being American anymore. So this was a big deal because politicians, redrawing lines, they were doing this all over the world. But in terms of national identity, it really bothered people. This is the first and the simplest cause of the war. This is a map from the Library of Congress, the year 1914, right before the war started. And you see a little bit from here. Every country has its own identity. You have Italy, you have Poland, you have the Russian bear, you have the lion. You have all these things where people are feeling like their identity is being taken away from them. This is one of the first causes of World War I. Second cause of World War I, Trey?
I've just been mentally scarred for that.
Economic competition. Economic competition. So, write down on your second set of, on the notes, the note sheet, write the word economic in that blank. In the blank, and I'm going to read you the sentence. Economic. I'm about to read it to you. Yes. You write economic. We're doing the cause, and then I'm going back to the sentence. Imperialistic European countries were borrowing resources from their colonies in order to make more money. Okay, imperialism and colonies. Imperialism and colonies, they're making money. How does this work? You guys already know a lot of it because we've already talked about Spain, Britain, Portugal, all these places that were doing imperialism. There's a lot of satire from this era. Here is a satire of the Queen of Spain, and Spain is trying to get from its colonies some resources. What are the colonies that it's pulling on? Cuba and the Philippines. So here's one making fun of Spain. This one's making fun of Britain. You have one of these British men dressed with the British clothes of the era, and he has his feet spread from Cairo to the Cape. Where is Cairo?
Egypt.
Of what? Egypt, right. It's the capital of Egypt. And the Cape is talking about South Africa. So look under his feet. The shadow is Africa. The point is that Britain had itself spread all over Africa. And it wasn't just Britain and Spain. Denmark got in on it. Here you have this strange snake that's choking the life out of an African country for the sake of rubber. Because there were rubber trees in a country that they found a place that they could get resources. Look at this picture on the right here. This was called the Scramble for Africa. During this era, I like this illustration. All these people representing the country leaders are all pulling on Africa, trying to get their little bit of Africa. Even the Dutch people down here at the bottom with the funny hats on. They're all pulling on Africa. But why? Because of this. Because at this time, tons of resources were being discovered in Africa. Look at these resources. Gold, diamonds, oil. petroleum. Iron and uranium are also mined. This is all mining stuff. Some of it was agriculture, cotton, coffee, but a lot of it was mining. Yes, why?
So, you said that they found that there was like resources coming.
Mm-hmm.
How did they find that out? Because is there like people in there and then they come back and tell them?
Right.
Because wouldn't you not want to tell everyone so that you can go yourself?
Well, you remember we studied David Livingstone. He's noteworthy because he was one of the first explorers to Africa. But since these were not countries at the time, there were people that lived all over Africa, but they weren't countries. So it wasn't like they could keep out explorers from Europe. The explorers were just exploring. And when they found something, then they would go back and tell the people in their country, oh, we got to come claim this. And what happened is that the European countries started going and claiming with boundaries. But if let's say, right here, this is Belgium. This is not a natural boundary to Africa. There would have been lots of different people groups that existed in here. The boundaries were created because of the resources. And the boundaries were created because of arguments over who had possession of those boundaries. To this day, a country like Nigeria has it has artificially created boundaries that combine together a very Muslim and a very Christian sections that do not get along, and it's caused chaos for generations because the boundary lines were often drawn by Europeans who had no regard for what were the natural ways that these countries should fall out. Their concern was getting resources out of Africa and how much land and how many resources could they get. So they would draw the boundaries around where the diamond mines were, with no concern for the natives who lived there. But of course, it ultimately caused a lot of trouble because the people eventually found a way to rebel or to want power or something like that. Yes, Ben?
Why is Kenya green?
Why is what?
Kenya green?
It wasn't claimed by anybody. The gray, and this is a very simple map. There are maps that are more expensive. But let me ask you,
Wait,
gold and diamonds. Are you guys aware that they're really, really hard things to mine?
Mm-hmm.
And you know that sometimes people talk about blood diamonds because of how bad the process is, how many people die in the mining of them, and that sort of thing. Okay, so who do you think was doing the mining?
Probably Britain.
Africans, yes. Either low-paid Africans who were native to the area or enslaved by the people who were in there. And this is an issue that you'll hear people talk about even to this day, where sometimes there's still low-paid people here. If you're tired of sitting on your knees, you honestly can sit on the chair. It's cool now. Yeah, the chair is all pulled up. All right, you can see over here, like for instance, France had a ton of this part of West Africa. To this day, a lot of French is spoken in West Africa. Look at all that Britain had, all this pink. Britain had a lot of what resources? Gold and diamonds, plus some other stuff. And so all of this was parceled up, like Blythe had asked, parceled up for the purpose of pulling resources out of it. Yes?
So you see in the place where it says Italy, or in the place that Italy took,
Mm-hmm.
why is there those red streaks?
It looks like it's also Great Britain. So it's pink and green there, so they must have debated that part of it. And most of Italy is near Italy. This is right across the Mediterranean Sea from Italy itself.
If it's like
It reminds
But
me
it
of
wasn't
like-
only Africa. Here's the interesting thing. It was also the Middle East. Because just less than a decade before World War I started, oil was discovered by the British in the Middle East. And then it became an issue of trying to pull resources also out of the Middle East. And everything becomes complicated. This is part of why the war happened. What is it called when one country extends its influence over another, Michael? No, not internationalism. It's the bad
It's
word.
imperialism.
The word that we use that's more negative, I should say. All right, third cause of World War I. Life.
Sorry, What did you say for the blank?
Shh. Ask him. What's the third cause of World War I?
Formation of alliances.
Formation of alliances. I want you to go to your paper and I want you to write the word alliances on number 3. Alliances on number 3. Okay, I'm going to read the sentence. Countries form partnerships in order to have a better chance to take on their rivals in a war. Soren, that word is partnerships on the third one. Countries form partnerships. The same way that you might say, well, my team is Virginia Tech. Well, my team is UVA. They're just different teams. You're on different sides. I grew up in Georgia. My dad went to Georgia Tech. We were on the Georgia Tech side. We thought University of Georgia was terrible. But they're not really. They're just another school. They're just the other team, the ones that you compete against. Alliances are formed because nations sort of bond together in teams. Very similar to our team approach. And in that formation of alliances is probably one of the big reasons the war started. So, 3 nations joined together, triple alliance. What nations were they, Lois? Right. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy are all located right in the center of Europe, so they were nicknamed and often called the Central Powers. They were all together. Because they were all sort of a team bonding together in alliance, the nations around them said, well, we need to have our own thing going on. So, Madeline, what were the triple entente, the other 3 nations? Right. France, Russia, and Great Britain said, let's do it also. Let's go around. And so now you have these countries in the center, and you have these countries around the outside. And you know what? There is no good reason the assassination of a little archduke in a country that didn't even matter that much should start the greatest war in human history up to this point. Except that the alliances, when Austria-Hungary reacted, the other 2 countries joined in, the others were on. It happened because of that. It was because all these things had built up and created this. By the way, we joined in on the Allied side in both wars. Both times you can kind of think Allies is where we joined. 4th cause, Wesley, of World War I is? Secret diplomacy. I know this is the one you've been looking forward to, the secret diplomacy. You should write the word secret in your blank, and here's the sentence. Hardly any of the nations trusted each other, so they used bribes, threats, and spies, and never really knew who was on their side. Spies, you ready for some spy posters? Legitimate spy posters from World War II in Britain. I want you to imagine you're walking around in Britain. This is what's posted up. Don't talk. The web is spun for you with invisible threads. Keep out of it. Help to destroy it. Stop equals think. Ask yourself if what you are about to say might help the enemy. Spies are listening. You're about to go to lunch with your friend. Be careful. Spies are listening. You think that you're about to have a meeting. What if the person you're meeting with is a spy? It's kind of cool to watch TV shows where this happens. It's not really fun to actually worry about it when you're going to lunch with somebody. This is the atmosphere. Let me read you the other one. Beware of female spies. Women are being employed by the enemy to secure information from Navy men on the theory that they are less liable to be suspected than male spies. Beware of inquisitive women as well as prying men. See everything, hear everything, say nothing concerning any matter bearing on the work of the Navy. Silence is safety. This was an atmosphere that felt like around every corner something's about to jump out at you. The 5th cause of World War I was? 5th cause, Brody? 5th cause is, Soren already said it, militarism. Write it in the blank and let me give you the fifth sentence. Science and technology made nations and their soldiers feel strong and more powerful than ever before. Okay. When you think about World War I and what was leading up to it, I want you to think about this. Enthusiastic support for recruiting. Look at the picture. Military formations. Here's what was going on. This is how people felt. We're so strong. We have machine guns. We have rocket launchers. No one will ever beat us. We are destroying the enemy. There won't even be a fight. So, put it all together. People are worried about their identity. There's all this pulling resources from other places. They're on teams, and they see spies everywhere, and they're sure of their power, their military might. No wonder that when Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife of Austria-Hungary were assassinated, it was like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. And it just started. A quick 1-minute recap. The words are a little different, but it's still a good review.
You may be aware of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This was, in fact, the trigger which set off the war from a number of underlying causes. These were militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Militarism created an arms race out of competition and fear of neighbouring nations. Germany tried to compete in a naval race with Britain, building more and more ships. Alliances were created to check the balance of power between nations. In 1882, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance. France, Britain, and Russia reacted in 1907 by creating the Triple Entente. Imperialism caused another type of competition and disagreement. The British and French empires made Germany jealous as it tried to colonize parts of Africa. Nationalism created the feeling that countries were better than others and promoted the anti-Austro-Hungarian sentiments in Serbia.
All right. So, there's a lot to cover in World War I, more than we can possibly just talk about. But some of the things I want to show you because it's going to help sketch a picture. Like, for instance, when we talk about the slow-moving airships that the Germans used to bomb them, you might legitimately go like, oh, wait, what were those? They were hard-shelled, massively huge airships filled with hydrogen gas, which is very flammable. And they were even used in between the wars. In fact, they were used till 1935, I think it was, when one of the airships that had come over the ocean exploded while landing in New Jersey. It was the Hindenburg explosion. This is an airship over New York City. These airships were so cool. This is what they looked like on the inside. Think like the Titanic. This is what it looked like when it was moving, 75 miles an hour. Fancy on the inside. No seatbelts. Cruise ship, kind of. Commercial airplane. They're talking about building new ones to transport stuff, which would be 5 times bigger than skyscrapers. These were 800 feet high.
Maybe like a cruise ship nowadays.
Oh, cruise ships are huge too. They're like
the same type of cruise ship or bigger?
I don't know the answer to that, but they're kind of like cruise ships in the air. Guys, that's a video camera from back in those days. This whole video is on Google Classroom for you. This was the weather station. They had to check the weather for their flight.
Oh,
Uh-oh, I slipped.
that's scary.
That reminds me. I just like jumped out. I don't know if I would have.
All right.
Oh.
But there was something else that happened. You guys probably all know this. There was a ship that was sunk, and it was called the no. It was called the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a British ship that was not a military ship. Although there were many British ships that were sort of faking it back in these days, German U-boats or submarines were in the waters. Britain had blockaded, and they had basically gotten in the way of the Germans being able to get food. I posted an entire article about this on Google Classroom for you. The rest of the things I posted are videos. This article I thought was quite good. This right here is what started to turn American public sentiment. We had taken an isolationist point of view. This started to shift public sentiment to wanting to get involved with the war because there were Americans on board. All right, side note, during this time there were people, like, what were they called?
Christian Armenian.
Yes, they were Christians. They were from Armenia, so they're the Christian Armenians. Armenia was a country. This right here was way bigger than the Trail of Tears. Way bigger than what America did to the Native Americans. It was probably only, we'll say, not as big as the Holocaust itself, but it was that idea. It was a genocide. It was an attempt by the Ottoman Turks to completely ruin and destroy this group of people called the Armenians. Yes, what?
Is there a chapter in this book about it?
No, it's mentioned in the book. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. The pictures are really sort of horrible. Like, here's some pictures I thought were good to see. Everything's photo documented, what they did.
Oh, I thought
These are the Turks. They're standing on a wall over top of these Armenians that are about to be executed for no crime except just being Armenian, because they are basically trying to get rid of them, like the Jews with Hitler. They were taken, like led out, taken away from their villages, which were then burned, destroyed. Over 1.5 million out of 2 million total people that existed were killed. And there have been protests for 70 years in our nation because our government has been unwilling to acknowledge this as a genocide. Why? Because Turkey is our ally. And the Turkish government was responsible for this, and they didn't want it to be admitted and acknowledged. This was a slide I had 4 years ago, and I'm happy to be able to pull the same slide and put an update on it. In 2021, for the first time ever, a U.S. president, President Biden, acknowledged what happened in Armenia as a genocide. That's what the covers on the mouth are for, saying that the U.S. is complicit by being silent about what happened. All right, some sort of fun things. This would have been the heroes for kids your age back in the World War I. The fighter pilots, the dog fighting, the flying aces. This is where Snoopy and the Red Baron came from. Here is actually Snoopy and the Red Baron, flying aces from World War I. And if you're going to think about World War I, what you have to think about is trench warfare. Trench warfare was horrific, and it defined the war, especially on the Western Front. It is for this reason that one of the greatest books on World War I is the book All Quiet on the Western Front, a book about a young man's experience on the German army being in the war. I'm only going to read a couple of these quotes. We were 18 and had begun to love life in the world, and we had to shoot it to pieces. Don't put your stuff away yet. I'll tell you when you can. The first bomb, the first explosion burst in our hearts. We are cut off from activity, from striving, from progress. We believe in such things no longer. We believe in the war. Hold on. Another one, a couple of chapters later. I'm young. I'm 20 years old, and yet I know nothing of life but despair, death, and fear. And fatuous superficiality cast over an abyss of sorrow. I see how people are set against one another, and in silence, unknowingly, foolishly, obediently, innocently slay one another. I don't want you to put your stuff away yet. I want you to listen to this last quote. don't, shh, just be quiet for a minute. When the boy dies at the end of the book, this is how the book concludes. Everybody died. It's not a spoiler.
So it's like
The trench warfare was brutal and nearly everyone died from disease or being shot. He fell in October 1918 on a day that was so quiet and still on the whole front, the Army report confined itself to a single sentence, all quiet on the Western Front. He had fallen forward and lay on the earth as though sleeping. Turning him over, one saw that he could not have suffered long. His face had an expression of calm, as though almost glad the end had come. It is a beautiful and a horrifying book. Okay, I want you guys to watch one video on trench warfare. You're allowed to pack up
Trench
your stuff
warfare.
now.
Trench
And
cross-section.
I
World
posted
War I.
too. Yeah, I think she
On the
is. She
Western
asked me to
Front,
read it.
trench
You
systems
don't
were
get up,
developed
just
into
pack
a
your stuff and
sophisticated
listen.
network. In 1914, trenches were quickly dug out by both sides, parallel to each other, from the North Sea through Belgium and France. The trenches would offer some protection for the troops from overwhelming enemy artillery and infantry fire. Entrenching was the fast method of creating a trench system by having soldiers dig foxholes. This was dangerous, as it would be done in the line of sight of the enemy. A sapper could then transform this into a more sophisticated trench system that was deep enough for a man to safely stand up. As the war went on, the trench systems became more complex for permanent occupation. The wall facing the enemy was called a parapet, which was strengthened with sandbags to protect from enemy fire and wooden planks to strengthen the sides of the trench from collapsing in. Here there was a fire step that formed a firing position and a way for the soldier to step out onto no man's land. An ammunition shelf was also dug into the side. The wall facing the back of the trench was called the parados. Here were dugouts where the soldier could eat and sleep and seek protection from artillery bombardments. More sophisticated protection came in the form of underground bunkers, which could also be used for storage of ammunition, food, and weapons, as well as command centers for officers to communicate orders with headquarters. On the floor were duck boards to provide secure ground and aid in drainage to keep the soldiers' feet away from the water, which caused diseases such as trench foot in the muddy, soggy terrain of the Western Front. Trenches were built in zigzags instead of straight lines, so that if the enemy managed to enter it, they would not be able to shoot down them. A typical trench system was 3 lines, approximately 800 yards or 730 meters apart. The first line, that was nearest to the enemy, was the fire trench. This was the most unpleasant and dangerous place to be. They were about 8 feet or 2.4 meters deep, and 6 feet or 1.8 meters wide. The fire trench was the main line of resistance, with machine gun nests placed at strategic points and barbed wire placed in the front area known as no man's land. The sapper would also dig out a sap head, which went slightly ahead into no man's land to form a listening post. The second line was the support trench, forming the second line of defense if the first line was taken away by the enemy. A kitchen and a dressing station kept the men fed and treated for any wounds. Soldiers were rotated every week between front line and support trenches. The third line was the reserve trench. These were connected to each other through communication trenches, which were used to transport soldiers, ammunition, and food supplies, and orders from trench line to trench line. Latrines were also placed along these trenches. Behind these lines were artillery. German trench systems tended to be better overall in comparison to British trenches because of a number of reasons. One was that the British thought the trenches would only be temporary, whereas the Germans accepted that stalemate would set in and put the effort into developing better trenches, including more comfortable bunkers that were deeper into the ground, away from artillery fire. On the Western Front, the Germans were also on higher ground than the British, who were in the lowlands. This meant that the British Army would be in unpleasant terrain, with high water levels and mud.
All right, you guys are dismissed. Watch the videos on Google Classroom to learn more.